Hello, everyone. My name's James Heaney. I'm a lecturer here in English and Irish Studies at Carlow College in South Leinster. And today I'm going to talk to you about one of William Shakespeare's absolutely most stunning dramas, Macbeth, or to give it its full title there, The Tragedy of Macbeth. Um, we're going to focus on the first act of the play because we've only got 35 minutes or so. And but also, more importantly, because I think if you have a good sense of the action in Act One and a good sense of what it entails, the significance of that action, then the rest of the play will really open up for you very easily. And one of the things I'm going to suggest to you is that this play really revolves around the character of Macbeth himself, more so than the tragedy of Hamlet revolves around Hamlet or King Lear around King Lear. The literary critic Harold Bloom has noted that Macbeth dominates this play. It's about a third of the lines in this drama are spoken by Macbeth. So there are very, interesting characters aside from Macbeth in the play. His wife, of course, the witches, and others. But um, their interest in the drama really kind of relates to the impact they have on Macbeth's own story. It's his uh, story that's being dramatized here. And if we get to grips with Macbeth and what's going on with him, both in terms of what he does, but also in terms of what his motivations are, what his thinking is in relation to the momentous decisions that he makes. Well, the particularly momentous one that he makes by the end of Act One, then you're very well positioned to understand the rest of the action. Not just, it's not about what happens necessarily, uh, more so about the significance of what happens, because that's the kind of issue that Macbeth sorts out in his own mind in this opening act. So let's get on with it there. We'll start with the title. It's The Tragedy of Macbeth. So in what sense or why is this called a play called a tragedy? Well, the first reason, most obvious reason, is that in the first edition of Shakespeare's plays, called the First Folio, published about 7 years after he died in 1616, um, it's listed as a tragedy in that publication. So you see here Mr. William Shakespeare's comedies, histories, and tragedies. This is from, if you look up this fantastic website here, the British Library Online. They've got a page on Shakespeare and a kind of you can scroll through the first folio and there's really interesting contemporary documents and essays and analyses of Shakespeare and his plays and the world in which he lived. Can't recommend it strongly enough. But one of the interesting things about this is that a play like Macbeth could well have been categorized, or not so much categorized, but written by Shakespeare as a history play rather than a tragedy. There was, after all, a real medieval king of Scotland, or Alba as it would have been called in the 11th century, called Macbeth. He did oust the reigning king, Duncan the First, from power and then become king himself for a number of years, and then was ousted, killed by Duncan the First's son, Malcolm. So these are all characters in Shakespeare's play, and the events that he depicts in the play, he takes a lot of license. He reinvents things, but he was using a history book from the time called Holinshed's Chronicles as his basis for devising the drama. Now he does take liberties. He's not it's not strictly accurate historically, and we don't know how exactly accurate Holinshed's Chronicles were, but we can assume they were in large part. But one of the ways in which Shakespeare kind of makes Macbeth's story his own, as opposed to a kind of a historical narrative, is in the character of Hamlet himself. In the character of Macbeth himself. This is Shakespeare's creation, not Holinshed's. It didn't come from Holinshed's histories. In fact, Shakespeare kind of whatever Holinshed has to say about Macbeth in his chronicles, Shakespeare often deviates from that. So this is what makes it a tragedy as opposed to a history play, I'd suggest. It relates to the representation of Macbeth's character, and not just in terms of what he does, but in terms of why he does what he does, and what that means for him, the struggle he goes through to convince himself, for example, by the end of Act One, to kill the reigning king of Scotland. Remember, Macbeth was a warrior, both historical Macbeth and more so even in the play that Shakespeare writes. So he's well used to killing people. He does that for a living. And what we learn about him in Act One, when he puts down a rebellion against King Duncan, when he's still loyal to Duncan, is that he really enjoys his work and he's really good at it. And everybody admires him on account of it. Duncan calls him his peerless kinsman, a worthy gentleman, my valiant cousin. So he's at the top of his game when we meet him in the opening scenes of this drama. But all of that changes, of course. So the term tragedy, like it dates back to ancient Greece, which is the 5th century BC, which is where drama as an art form and theatre all begin. And one of the most important commentators from that time, Aristotle, a philosopher who went to see a lot of plays, he maintained that a tragic hero in the plays he was seeing in ancient Greece is someone who is exceptional. And exceptional in two senses. He's of a very high rank. It is invariably a he. Um, he's of a very high rank socially, so a king, a prince, Prince Hamlet, King Lear, Macbeth, of course, a thane, a nobleman, and then a king. But they're also exceptional, the tragic hero, in the sense of their character, their personality. It's not that they're particularly good or saintly, but they have a kind of larger than life almost type personality. Um, and they do some incredible things. And um, so Macbeth clearly fits that bill. Um, and But there's another point that follows on from that. Aristotle says what the reason why it's called a tragedy or tragic hero is because they suffer a fall from grace. Um, so they're at the top of the game at the start of the play, and then by the end, their lives are destroyed, and they probably die as well. And this is Macbeth's story, in summary, certainly. The peerless kinsman of Act One is described as a butcher, a dead butcher, by the end of the play in Act Five. And Macbeth himself has a sense that he's lost it basically by the end of the drama, and he's done some things that are unconscionable. He's kind of even, you could say, lost his soul, his sense of self, um, his eternal jewel, as he refers to it at one point in the play. And there's a great Shakespearean critic called A.C. Bradley of the early 20th century, and he kind of focuses on this kind of conflict, the downfall of a tragic hero. And he says that Shakespeare's tragedies, they're made of two kinds of conflict. There's an outward conflict. You can see here persons and groups. So the outward conflict in the tragedy of Macbeth is Macbeth's struggle to win the crown of Scotland, isn't it? And get rid of Duncan and then get rid of his enemies that follow on after Duncan. There's your outward conflict. But Bradley goes on, there's also a conflict of forces within the hero's soul. And this is what we see in Shakespeare's drama, and particularly so in Act One, the kind of psychic conflict that Macbeth goes through in convincing himself to turn bad, if you like, and commit this atrocious act of regicide, of killing a king. So as I was saying earlier, he's a warrior. He's well used to king and killing. He gets off on it, you could say, given some of the language that's used in the play. And he doesn't feel bad about any of that. In fact, this is what makes him a hero. But to kill a king is another matter altogether. Because the king at the time was King James the First from Scotland. Um, and he uh, developed this idea of divine investiture, that it was God who had really put him in place. So if you had a problem with him as a king, you had a problem with God. Um, and so that makes the killing of a king a kind of sacrilegious act as well as a crime. Um, and so this is one of the reasons why Macbeth has to really grapple with his conscience in Act One, because he's planning to kill a king, and he doesn't like, it's that's not an ordinary soldier. So let's um, um, let's start with the play. So, scene one, we're in an open place, a very typically short, brief Shakespearean scene setting. We see a lot of different directors kind of use that creative license that phrase gives to come up with their own ideas about what an open place might be. Um, but there's a storm going on, thunder and lightning, and then we have these three witches enter. That's another kind of creative decision that a director or a dramatic company have to make. How are you, how are the witches going to appear? Now, in Shakespeare's day, when there was a sort of a very concrete belief in the power of witches, and King James was very keen to promote the idea that his crown and the whole country was under threat from witches and their supernatural powers. Indeed, there was the whole of Europe was kind of in the medieval period near obsessed with the idea of witches. Um, and so James, a very smart operator, he kind of presented the idea that, they're a threat to the country, they're a threat to our way of life. So he kind of, you need to give me more power in order to deal with this threat, because he was trying to consolidate the notion of an absolute monarchy. In the medieval period, in the feudal period, the monarch had limited power, was dependent in large part upon the aristocracy, the nobles to fund them and such like. But James wanted to kick things on a bit. He wanted to create a kind of a modern state of Britain with all power centralized in London, where he was, and he became a kind of a dictator. So one of the ways he did that was to create this sense that, oh, there's an axis of evil out there, and they're going to destroy your country. So these you better give me the power to deal with these witches. They're everywhere. Um, and of course, once he's given that power, he's never going to relinquish it. So this is a short scene, this opening scene, but sets the sinister tone of the play, and particularly the idea that there's a kind of moral ambiguity going to unfold over the course of the drama. And that moral ambiguity really finds its dramatic expression in the character of Macbeth himself. He's continually kind of toing and froing in terms of what's the right thing to do as this act progresses. Basically, should he kill King Duncan? Has he a right? Can he live with himself if he kills Duncan? Is he entitled to do that? What are the reasons for? What are the reasons against? He's deliberating with himself continuously about that issue. And as I'm sure you're aware, the kind of dramatic device that Shakespeare uses to give dramatic expression to that deliberation is the soliloquy. And Shakespeare, although he didn't invent the soliloquy, he perfected it. And critics such as Harold Bloom, mentioned already, he remarks that literary characters, so the characters in plays prior to Shakespeare, remains relatively unchanging. Women and men are represented as aging and dying, but not as changing because their relationship to themselves, rather than to the gods or God, has changed. In Shakespeare, characters develop rather than unfold. And they develop because they reconceive themselves, they reimagine themselves. Sometimes this happens because they overhear themselves talking, soliloquies, whether to themselves or to others. Self overhearing is their royal road to individuation. So, for Bloom, what's one of the most remarkable things about Shakespeare's dramas, and particularly his tragedies, is that he gives us a sense of the depth and complexity of the human personality itself in a way that no dramatist had succeeded before. And this is what the device of the soliloquy in particular is enabling him to do. It's showing us the self in a process of change and deliberation. Macbeth is talking to himself very often about what he should do and what he should not do. So that was a huge dramatic innovation. Um, Right. There we have this short scene one. Then in scene two, we move to a different location altogether, a camp. And we learn that there's a war going on, kind of a civil war. It's a rebellion within Scotland. MacDonald is rebelling against the king. So there's real trouble afoot. And we hear the stage direction, alarm within, enter King Duncan, Malcolm, and Donalbain, who are, of course, his two sons, and then noblemen like Lennox with attendants meeting, and then a bleeding captain enters. So it's interesting, isn't it? There's King Duncan. His whole realm is under threat. Um, and he's back a safe distance from the battle. He's back in camp, trying to find out from people like this captain what's actually going on at the front. He's not there himself. Now, King Duncan, we know in the play, is an elderly man at this point. So maybe it's kind of understandable that he wouldn't be out there doing the fighting himself. But what about these two guys here? His sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, should they not be out there? They're kind of like medieval draft dodgers, these guys. We're wealthy. We're the king's son now. We don't have to be going out doing our fighting. We'll pay people to risk their lives for us instead. And so then the captain enters fresh from the battlefront, and he tells King Duncan and his sons just how doubtful it stood, the outcome of the battle. He said, it had been going on for ages, and the armies, both that of MacDonald and the loyal forces, were exhausted, and nobody knew how it was going to play out. But MacDonald, the rebel, he was full of himself. He was thinking, this is my moment type of a thing. So it wasn't looking good for King Duncan's forces until Macbeth. Let's read it. For brave Macbeth, well, he deserves that name, disdaining fortune with his brandished steel, which smoked with bloody execution like Falor's minion, carved out his passage till he faced the slave, which ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell to him, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chops and fixed his head upon our battlements. So he is some warrior now. You'd want him in your army rather than being facing him, this guy. He doesn't just kill the rebel leader. First of all, he swords his way through the enemy forces, um, carved out his passage with his sword, carving out a path for himself through human flesh and blood, until he faces the slave being this derogatory term for the rebel leader, MacDonald. And then, without a word, he unseamed him from the nave to the chops. So he doesn't just kill him, which is all he has to do. He gets his sword and he sticks it into his lower belly and reefs the sword up to his cheeks. It's a brutal murder. And then that isn't enough. Then he cuts off his head and fixes it upon our battlements. It's ferocious violence. Um, and what's the reception for that? Duncan? Oh, my valiant cousin. So Macbeth is his cousin. Worthy gentleman, so full of praise for him. For this fight. And of course, it isn't ended there. The captain goes on to say, well, when he'd done away with MacDonald and won that battle, then there were more forces coming to threaten the king's realm from Norway, and some mercenary soldiers from Ireland, indeed. And Macbeth looked after all of them. So it's on foot of this that he gets his promotion, if you like, um, from King Duncan. He becomes he's Thane of Clams, as it's pronounced in Scottish, and now he's going to be Thane of Cawdor. Uh, Duncan declares. So this violence is welcomed. This violence by Macbeth makes him a hero, and he doesn't have to think twice about it. He enjoys his work and let him on at it. But the killing of a king, as I mentioned, altogether different kind of scenario. And that's frightens the bejesus out of Macbeth, the thought of killing a king, for the reasons that we've mentioned earlier. So let's move on then. In scene three, we're back. Well, we're back with the witches on the heath that they'd mentioned at their last meeting. So storm still rumbling on. The three witches enter. They talk among themselves about what they've been up to, what nasty spells they've made since they last met in the open place. And then Banquo and Macbeth enter, and they're on their way to Duncan's palace in Force, the royal palace of Scotland. So they're coming away from the battle, and they come across these witches. Macbeth's phrase, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. Foul and weather's miserable and like, but fair, well, sure, he's won this battle. So again, it echoes, of course, the witches' lines, final lines from the opening scene, doesn't it? And again, so reestablishes in the audience mind this sense of kind of moral confusion or moral ambiguity. And this is the issue we kind of want to focus on here, because that moral confusion is really animates Macbeth's character in this opening act. So Banquo, how far 'tis called to Forest to Duncan's palace, and then he sees the witches. What are these so withered and so wild in their attire that look not like inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it? Live you? He asked them. Or are you aught that man may question? You seem to understand me. By each at once her choppy finger laying upon her skinny lips, you should be women, yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so. Yeah, it's interesting to note that the witches, their gender is called into question, but they would have been played by um, boys in Shakespeare's theatre company, because due really to kind of religious conventions, the Puritans, we're talking the post-Protestant Reformation, of course, in Shakespeare's day. Puritans who had a lot of power at this point didn't like drama, didn't like theatre, and particularly didn't like the idea of women performing in these theatres. So it was young boys that played the parts of characters like the witches, maybe not necessarily young, but males certainly, or Cleopatra, or Ophelia, Juliet. all played by boys. In any case, um, the witches ignore Banquo. In effect, it's when the witches ignore Banquo. Yes, it's when Macbeth speaks to them. Speak if you can. What are you? That they come out with their famous lines. All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Clams. Hail Macbeth, all hail, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail Macbeth that shall be king hereafter. So it's the third one of those we know, although Macbeth doesn't know at this point, that is a prophecy, and of course it's the third one becoming king that he's most interested in. And look at the what Banquo's next line here. What that tells us. Good sir, he says. So he's not addressing the witches, he's addressing Banquo. He says, Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair? So this reminds us the kind of the limitations of a script. Remember, drama, unlike poetry or any form of prose, novels, short stories, and the like, drama isn't written to be read. It's written to be performed. Um, and a performance is very different to words on a page. And we see that here. So what Shakespeare is drawing his audience's attention to here, in case they haven't noticed it, that is that um, uh, Macbeth was rattled by the prophecies. This good news, Duncan is saying, but this guy looks shaken, rapt. So he said, why? What's the problem? So the question in our minds as an audience is, yeah, what is the problem with Macbeth? Why would he be getting a bit angsty at this prophecy? Could it be perhaps that he's had thoughts of becoming King of Scotland and what he might have to do to make it to become King of Scotland, what laws, what crimes he might have to commit? Is it like he feels these witches are reading his mind or something like that? Again, it's not clear, it's ambiguous, but this is a play that is up to its neck in ambiguity. But the issue comes back in subsequent scenes, we'll see. So that's we see then when he does kind of gather himself together a little bit, he responds in what is it's referred to in the stage directions as an aside, but it's a soliloquy, close to a soliloquy, certainly. So this is what Macbeth is saying to himself on foot of what um, well, this is what he says after Ross comes in with Angus, isn't it? Again, these noblemen and the witches have disappeared at this point in scene three, and Ross confirms the second prophecy. He tells Macbeth, "Well, the king has decided you are going to be the Thane of Cawdor because he was a traitor and a rebel." Um, and so Macbeth is astounded and he turns aside. So he's speaking to himself or, towards the audience. Two truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act. Of course, the swelling act being the idea that he's going to become king. The swelling act of the imperial theme. I thank you, gentlemen, he says, and then he goes back to himself. This supernatural soliciting, the witch's words to him cannot be ill, cannot be good. If it's ill, if it's bad, if it's evil, why hath it given me earnest of success, commencing in a truth? So they're saying good things to me, and they've been, realized already. I am Thane of Cawdor. But if their words were good, and I can embrace that, he says, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock against my ribs against the use of nature? This is the key bit here, I think. Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of mind that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not. So if this prophecy is good news for me, why am I so rattled by it? These present fears are less than horrible imaginings. So what is he referring to in those imaginings that he's having? And he says, my thought. And look at that word there, murder. Now he's not literally thinking of murdering, or it's not quite that explicit in any case. He's thinking, whose murder is yet but fantastic, whose acting on the thought is yet but fantastical. I haven't done anything. But even the thought of it shakes my single state of mind. That function is smothered in surmise, in guessing and speculating. So he becomes a little bit Hamlet-like, he procrastinating, he doesn't know what to make of it. And nothing is but what is not. It's like foul is fair and fair is foul. Just this thought, this imagining, whatever it is horrendous to him, and it's rattling him to his core. It's not, it's his own psyche that is doing that. So he doesn't say what the thought is, but we might think, oh, it's got something to do with murder, and he wants to become king. So we put our two and two together. Perhaps again, it's a suggestion. It's not certain that that's the definitive meaning, but it's a plausible one. And if it does stand up, that Macbeth is already thinking of killing King Duncan, then it shows us the deliberation, the inner conflict that he's starting to go through now in Act One. And it tells us that even before he meets his wife, who's we know very encouraging that he should kill the king, that thought is it's in his head. So then we move to scene four, and we're in King Duncan's palace. The battle's over. He enters again with his sons and attendants and Lennox, and he's asking after is the Thane of Cawdor, has he been executed yet? He was a traitor, and Macbeth's going to have his region now. He's becoming that Thane. And he's told he has been executed, and nothing became him, like the act of dying, and he repented and all the rest of it. Um, and we see King Duncan is rattled by this himself, because the Thane of Cawdor was somebody he says he had an absolute trust in him. So he couldn't believe it when this guy turned traitor on him. And he comes out with that famous expression, isn't it? There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face, because this guy was making out that he was the king's loyal friend and subject, and then he rebels against him. There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. But you could argue there is an art. Some people are very good at that, reading people and, guessing what's going on behind the surface of the face and that. But just that King Duncan doesn't appear to be very good at it. Like there's rebellions blown up in his realm. He doesn't appear, you could argue, as a very effectual king. And you compare that to Macbeth, who's a real manly man and a great warrior, and admired by his men, in terms of who deserves to be king rather than who is king and what's the lineage and all the rest of it. Um, you could see how Macbeth might be thinking, I'd make a good king, and I've made me bones, as they say in the gangster films. Anyhow, then Banquo and Macbeth arrive in to the palace, and they're given this humongous welcome by the king, and he's full of gratitude to Macbeth, as of course, he should be. Macbeth has saved his bacon, basically. And he comes out with this curious phrase, even when he's welcoming and thanking Macbeth. He says to him, More is thy due than more than all can pay. So I owe you so much that if I gave you everything, it still wouldn't be enough, be fair. Now, yeah, we might agree. Macbeth might agree. I can't pay you enough, I can't reward you enough. Well, make me king, and that'd do it, Macbeth might be thinking at this point. But of course, in this scene, Duncan declares that he is going to pass on his estate to his eldest son, Malcolm, the guy who's been hiding back in the camp during the battle. And this really riles Macbeth. Again, we have an aside at this point, so he's again talking to himself. The Prince of Cumberland. That is a step on which I must fall down or else o'erleap, for in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires, black let not light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand, yet let that be which the eye fears when it is dumb to see. So the idea that Malcolm, the eldest son, is going to become the new king is something that he can't allow to happen, this Prince of Cumberland. So he feels I have to take action at this point. I fall down here or else I or leap. And again, it's interesting to note that apparently, not that I'm a historian or know too much about the system of investiture and kingship in medieval Scotland, but as I understand it, it wasn't the kingship didn't necessarily pass from king to son to son. The thanes, the noblemen, had a say in who would become the next king after one died. So maybe Macbeth is thinking, this King Duncan, I've done all your fighting for you, and you're rewarding me with the Thane of Cawdor, and you're saying there's more stuff coming my way. But now your son's going to be the king. Where was he in the heat of battle? So we might feel a little bit of sympathy for Macbeth at this point. Um, Certainly, he's not happy. And then in the following scene, because at the end of scene four, of course, Macbeth, it's all very polite. Everybody's very complimentary to each other, and Duncan doesn't suspect at all that Macbeth is now plotting to take his kingship or that he's going to be resistant to the idea that Malcolm will become king. So he's told him, well, we're coming to Inverness, to your castle. And Macbeth, oh, that's just the best news ever. I'm going to rush on ahead and tell me wife about it. So not only does Macbeth do that, of course, rush on ahead to Inverness, where his castle is, he writes a letter to his wife, telling her everything that has happened, particularly obviously the witch's prophecies. Now that's interesting that Macbeth would do that. It kind of reveals that there's a good degree of intimacy and love between him and his wife that we don't often associate with medieval or even Renaissance type marriages and relationships, which were normally conceived of as sort of contracts or ways of becoming families becoming more wealthy and securing peace and those kind of things. But these are a couple who are very close together, intimate. And Macbeth, I mean, if that letter had been intercepted, he'd be in big trouble. Or if he didn't trust his wife the way he obviously does, she could show that letter to somebody, to the king or whatever, and Macbeth loses his head. So he has total trust in his wife. They're on the same hymn sheet, and she has a huge regard for him. But she knows him inside out and she feels she knows his weaknesses. So after she reads the letter, she comes out with these famous lines: Glams thou art, and Cawdor, and shall be what thou art promised. Yet, the king, of course, yet I do fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the illness that should attend it. What thou wouldst highly, thou wouldst that wouldst thou holily, wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. A lot of W's to get your mouth around there. But what she's saying clearly is that you have ambition. You know that you have the potential to be great. You'd make a great king, but you're too honorable, and you have to play false. You have to have a degree of illness to get on politically in these kind of situations. So you want to be holier than thou and not do anything that's going to besmirch your character or reputation or your honor. It needs to be done. And she's the person who'll be able to kind of encourage you into that action, she believes. So she carries on, hie thee hither, get yourself over here quickly, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise thee with the valour of my tongue, all that impedes thee from the golden round, which fate and metaphysical aid doth seem to have thee crowned withal. So get yourself over here, I'll chastise you. So here's a wife, medieval wife, talking about her. I'm going to tell you what's what. I'll provide you with your lead and get you to do what I know you kind of want to do, really. And what is fated and metaphysical aid are on your side, the witches. It's metaphysical, it's dark, they're evil, but still they have these powers, and everything is pointing towards uh, um, the need to take action, to seize the opportunity of this moment. Um, and then, of course, Macbeth enters, and she tries to talk him into it when she hears that Macbeth, one of the messengers, come in and said that the king is coming to stay the night here. And so she said, well, we have to do it. He's not leaving here alive. And when Macbeth comes in to the castle, she says to him, yeah, the king is coming. And when does he propose to leave? And Macbeth replies, well, tomorrow, as he purposes, as he intends. So that little equivocation there, he's planning to leave tomorrow, not he is going tomorrow. And so that's when she's right. We're going to kind of move on him tonight. And Macbeth is resistant to it. But at the same time, you could argue that, well, he's given his wife this information. They know each other very well. He might well know that if he tells her of this opportunity, the witch's prophecy and Duncan coming to stay the night in their castle, she will chastise him and push him psychologically into the action. Maybe he knows that he needs that push to make this fateful step and kill a king, just as she knows that that's his role, and he lacks the illness to to carry on with his action. So after scene five, we scene six, but and this is the arrival of King Duncan to Inverness, Macbeth's castle. And it's curious when he gets there with all his entourage, and he's the King of Scotland, nobody there to meet him in scene six. And eventually, Lady Macbeth comes out and she's full of praise and what an honor and all the rest of it, but she's left him standing there, the king, and Macbeth doesn't come out at all. Like the protocol would be, Macbeth should be out there to welcome the king into his own abode, but we don't know why he doesn't come out. Maybe he's rattled by the idea of, well, I'm going to murder him this night, and he doesn't have the wherewithal to face him at this point. It's again, it's uncertain. But what's also important about this scene, I think, is that um, Duncan, when he gets to the castle and he's waiting for his host to invite him in, he's looking around the place and he kind of he likes the castle and he says that it has a pleasant seat and the air recommends itself to our senses. This is the same castle where he's going to be slaughtered. So here's a king that really isn't on his game, isn't it? He's making bad decisions. He's not seeing the threats that are coming his way. So, in a very kind of maybe harsh fashion, we might be thinking this guy's not up to it. And Macbeth is would be a far more worthy king. But then in scene seven, in a room within Macbeth's castle, we have the first clear and in-depth soliloquy. And here's where we see that inner conflict playing itself out in his psyche. Or the idea of him, as Bloom we saw was saying, he's listening to himself. He's changing. There's a dialogue going on. He's arguing with himself, giving himself reasons for and against to kill Duncan. So let's have a read of this. First of all, he's contemplating the action. If it were done then to where well, it were done quickly. Um, and then he starts to, well, what will this mean? If the assassination could trammel up the consequence and catch with his surcease success, that but this blow might be the be all and end all here, but here upon this bank and shoal of time, we jump the life to come. So what he's saying there is that if this one action would be the end of it, and there'd be no further consequences or outworkings of that action, well, that'd be one thing, and I could do it. But we don't know. Actions have consequences, and you might be able to control the action and the assassination. Do it quickly, do it swiftly, do it like the warrior you are. You might accomplish that and be in control of that situation, but you're not in control of how people are going to respond, and unexpected things will happen that you didn't anticipate, and it could end up in a huge mess. But in these cases, as he goes on, we still have judgment here that we but teach bloody instructions which being taught return to plague the inventor. So, we teach ourselves to be bloody and violent. We don't know how that's going to play out. It could well come back to haunt us. The violence could be visited upon us. This even-handed justice commends the ingredients of our poisoned chalice to our own lips. So killing the king, he might succeed in that action, but he's worried at this point as well. What's going to happen next? And then he goes on in the scene to give himself a number of reasons as to why he shouldn't do this action. And these are kind of moral reasons. First of all, he says, well, the king, he's my cousin. The king is, supposed to be his faithful subject, not be the guy who kills him. Um, and he's here as well as my guest. And as a host, I'm supposed to protect guests, not slaughter them in their beds. So there's two good reasons. And a third reason, he says, this guy's been humble. He's been meek. He's been a good man as king. Maybe we think a bit ineffectual, but he's done right. So that would increase the sinfulness of my killing him. So he kind of talks himself out of it at this point until his wife enters. And like he tells her quite plainly when she comes in, we'll proceed no further in this business. Sorry, just before she enters, then he kind of recognizes that he has no legitimate grounds to kill Duncan. I have no spur to prick the sides of my intent, but only vaulting ambition, which o'erleaps itself and falls on the other. So he likens himself, if he carries through in this action, to a rider on a horse who kind of jumps onto the horse, but is so kind of ambitious in that jump that he actually falls off the other side. Um, so it's like Macbeth is almost kind of aware that if he goes through with this, it's going to end in tears, blood, his own blood, this poison chalice. So it's a sort of a foreboding, isn't it? That it's this isn't a good idea. But when Lady Macbeth enters, he changes again. He tells her, he said, we'll proceed no further in this business. He gives her his reasons, and she's disgusted with him. She said she's going to chastise him. Here comes the chastising. Was the hope drunk? She tells him. Of course, the two of them are alone together. Wherein you dressed yourself? Hath it slept since? And wakes it now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely? From this time, such I account your love. Art thou afeard to be the same in thine own act and valour as thou art in desire? Wouldst thou have that which thou esteemest the ornament of life, and live a coward in your own esteem, letting I dare not wait upon I would, like the poor cat in the adage? The poor cat in the adage, not too sure, some colloquial contemporary phrase, but clearly, what she's doing is attacking his masculinity and attacking his honor. She's saying the honorable thing, in effect, to do would be to act on your desires. It's only cowards don't act on their desires. You want this kingship. You deserve it. You want to be great. This is the ornament of life, and you're going to live a coward, not in the eyes of others, but how are you going to live with yourself in your own esteem? You're going to be a coward if you refuse this opportunity that has been laid before you now. The prophecy of the witches, and here's the guy in your castle, totally unsuspecting anything untoward is going to happen. And you want to do it, but you're not going to. There's only one reason why you wouldn't. You're a coward. So it's a ferocious chastisement of her husband. But as we've suggested, maybe Macbeth, deliberating with himself, kind of knew that he would need somebody to give him that push, and certainly it's a quite a ferocious push. So he resists at start. Prithee, peace, stop, he tells his wife. I dare do all that may become a man. Who dares do more is none. So don't be questioning my masculinity, he's saying. There's no problem there, but I know the limits. I know what's due from me. I know how to behave honorably. And if I lose my honor, then I'm not a man. But she's well able for him. What beast was then that made you break this enterprise to me? So why did you tell me about it then? If it's the wrong thing to do against her, why did you open your mouth in the first place to me? When you durst do it, then you were a man, and to be more than what you were, you would be so much more the man. Nor time nor place did then adhere, and yet you would make both. They have made themselves, and that their fitness now does unmake you. And then these really famous lines where, again, the issue of gender and what it means to be a man or a woman really comes into play. I have given suck and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from its boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. So that's kind of the clincher, isn't it? Um, I'd be more of a man than you in this situation, and if I vowed to do something, there's nothing going to stand in my way. So, as you said, like the play is very much about the character of Macbeth himself. It's his tragedy. But one of the ways in which it's extremely interesting is also in terms of gender. We have the witches, these weird sisters who look like women but maybe aren't women, and don't behave like good women are supposed to behave. But here we have Lady Macbeth as well, who certainly is a woman and completely human. But she's not acting in the stereotype of a woman either. A mother, a wife, supposed to be nurturing and caring and the like. She's declaring her ability to be more of a man than her own husband is. And it's evil, of course, what she's planning, even what she says there, the ferocity of it. So, again, this is one of the reasons why the play remains so sinister and frightening today. Because witches, right, we don't believe in them today, many people, and the idea of supernatural forces intervening. Uh, Although there's an argument for what's going on in the world, but when we see a human being turn bad, uh, like a wife, and she's saying, I've known how sweet it is to suckle babe. So she has had a child. She was a mother. Um, that's sinister, because the mother supposed to be, the nurturer, the carer, the life giver. Um, and Lady Macbeth is appearing as anything but that at this particular point in the play. So that's frightening, isn't it? Because you would trust her, as Duncan trusts her, as all the other characters in the play. They've no idea that this is what's going on in her psyche. They know to be frightened of witches and witches are evil and all the rest of it. But here comes somebody with a witch-like mentality, and she goes on, of course, to call down the spirits to unsex me now, inviting the evil forces in. But still, she looks like a normal, nurture-giving, caring woman. So that's something to be afraid of, certainly. And it has the desired effect on Macbeth. He concludes that towards the end of this scene, the end of Act One, he says to his wife, Bring forth men, children only, for thy undaunted metal should compose nothing but males. Will it not be received when we have marked with blood those two sleepy of his own chamber, those sleepy two of his own chamber, and used their very daggers, what they have done? Who dares? So she has the plan in place. She's the operator here, the kind of the brains behind the assassination of Duncan. She's taking the lead role, and in this scene, it's very interesting to notice she has so much of the dialogue. Macbeth is just sitting there listening to her most of the time. She's driving things forward. Um, and at one point, doesn't he? Just before these lines here, indeed, when he's been convinced, he says to her, "But what if we fail?" And that's a kind of a cowardly thing for the great warrior Macbeth to be worrying about. Not supposed to be thinking of the prospect of failure. But screw your courage to the sticking place, his wife tells him, and we'll not fail. So again, she's taken the masculine role in terms of the gender stereotypes of the time in this relation. And he's convinced by it. And this is the end of his deliberation in relation to the matter. Now, he does have lots of regrets and, but once this act is over, he's resolved to kill the king. And subsequent to that, resolved to do whatever else by way of violence and evil deeds he needs to do, killing Banquo's son, although Fleance, of course, escapes, killing Macduff's wife, children, babes, all his servants in his castle. He becomes a monster, certainly. So the idea of, the deliberation, the hesitation is resolved by the end of Act One, and we see it when he utters these lines: "I am settled and bent up each corporal agent to this terrible feat. Away and mock the time with fairest show. False face must hide what the false heart doth know." So we're back to that idea raised by Duncan, aren't we? That there's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. As he's telling his wife again, he's taking up his previous role. He's becoming the man. I'm going to use those air commas. He's starting to take a bit of charge now. Uh, Telling his wife, away and mock the time with fairest show. Don't let on any of our plans. We need to wear this smiling mask and be a villain, nonetheless. Of course, the irony in that is, we know in the banquet scene after the assassination of Banquo, maybe his best friend, um, that it's Macbeth himself who lets the side down and starts hallucinating and nearly announcing in public company that he's responsible for various deaths. Um, so, but that's not a matter of deliberation. He's resolved on his actions at this point. He's done the actions in Act Two by the time of the banquet scene. Um, but what it reveals is the extent of the psychic damage that killing King Duncan has had on Macbeth. So, as we said at the start, following Bradley, there's an outer conflict, right? And he's won that. He's become king. That's finished. Uh, but there's an inner conflict, and that isn't over. The outworkings of that, the consequences of killing King Duncan, he discovers, are out of control, not because he's been found out, but because he can't handle the thought of what he's actually done. So he's still in psychic turmoil about it. And the only way he can kind of escape from that is by wading further and further into more blood will get blood, he says. Yeah, it becomes a man of action. He tells himself, he stops thinking, the firstlings of my mind shall be the firstlings of my hand. I'm paraphrasing or misquoting there a little bit, but he says, when I when I think of what I'm going to do now as king, as tyrant, I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to let myself think about the consequences or the rights and wrongs of it. So that again reveals to us that it's in Act One that the terms of the remainder of the play are established by Shakespeare insofar as they relate to the character of Macbeth himself. Okay, guys, I think time's up. Leave yous. Best of luck with your studies and do try and enjoy the play. All the best. Bye now.